So just over an hour ago, Luke Cage dropped. To give you some background, I absolutely love both Daredevil and Jessica Jones, so coming into this fall, this is probably the series I was most anticipating, most excited for, so I stayed up till 2 in the morning an hour ago so I could watch this episode right as it dropped. In the first episode, tension is rising in Harlem as a club owner, a politician, a police investigator, and a guy working 2 jobs just to pay his bills, lives start to interact. An event unfolds that none of them are actually present for that end up pulling all of their lives together, though not even in the first episode, but you can see that is where this season is going. You can see what the inciting incident is that's going to bring all of these stories together. First thing I want to talk about is the genre. So each of these Marvel Netflix series feel very similar to each other, while each having a very unique and distinct genre to it. So Daredevil is like a martial arts show with a lawyer courtroom genre plotline going on as well. Jessica Jones was like a psychological thriller with a little bit of action in it, but very much more about the tension and the psychology of this character and what she's going through. Luke Cage feels like it's going to be a bit more of kind of like a mob type show where a guy's battling the mob and corruption and this business owner that's selling guns, and you can see where it's going. They even mention the show Scarface or movie Scarface within the first 10 minutes of it, and it seems like that was kind of an influence on it. You very much get that vibe to it. So whereas Daredevil would have these big action sequences or multiple action sequences every episode where Daredevil went out into action battling crime, battling a mob boss, here you don't really have that. That's not how this unfolds. It's very much about these characters, and each one of these different characters that's given a lot of time to get to know that person, how they fit into this bigger plot, and how each of them has a big backstory that's brought them to this moment that you can see where they're coming from with this story that's being developed and set up. You can just see the dominoes being put into place and being pushed over by the end of the episode, and you can just see this thing starting to unfold. But it's very character driven, and one of the things that's so cool about what they're doing with these Marvel series is they're all set in New York City, and really even in communities not too far away from each other. They're establishing a very small universe. So the fact that all these characters are intertwining doesn't seem contrived. It doesn't feel fake and forced. It feels like something that you could believe can happen because it's so contained. If you tried to do this with the MCU movies, they're intergalactic. They take place all over the United States, all over the world, and often far off in the galaxy. And so the idea that they'd be intertwined would feel forced. But here, because it's all in one city, it makes sense that you'd start to feel very kind of small universe where people know each other, lives interconnect, and a story like this can be told and it's plausible. The very first thing I noticed about this series was the very intentional and slow pacing to it. So the first scene is in a barber shop and it goes on pretty long, and even when the scene ends and it moves on to the next scene, it's really just an extension of the first scene. So as it's all kind of unfolding, I'm kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of going, like, I'm enjoying it because the dialogue is so strong and the relationships are so interesting, but this is going on for quite a bit. And really, I looked at my watch 30 minutes into it, and there'd only been kind of 4 scenes. They're at a barbershop, they're at a club, they're at an apartment, and then there's a scene where something goes down somewhere else. And that's the only locations really in the first 30 minutes of it. And so it's kind of slow paced, but it doesn't feel slow paced because the dialogue is so sharp, so witty. And that's one of the things I love about these Marvel series is the dialogue feels so real. It feels like real people talking in these situations. And that's true here too, where you actually want to hear them talking and get to know these characters as they're relating to each other. But the reason that the first 20 minutes of this is kind of slow paced and you're just seeing these characters is that each one of these characters is just a domino being set up, because it's so character driven and it's so small of a world that the characters interact with each other, and things that happen affect one another because they live in a small community. And it's the same way it would be if you live in a relatively small community. Something unfolds and people involved in it. That's what this is like. And so each one of these characters that are introduced, where it's a long scene, what you realize is it's setting up the dominoes. So when they eventually get pushed over like 30 minutes into it, you can see where all of this is going and why it was so intentionally and slow paced, so you could see all the different people. So as I mentioned, this isn't like Daredevil where there's a bunch of big action sequences. There is one action sequence. It's pretty brief and it's very cool, but because everything else had been so dialogue and character based, it did feel a little bit out of place, a little bit forced, like they felt like they had to include this in it, but they didn't necessarily in the grander plot have a good reason to have it. So it felt a little bit forced in there, but it's a very cool sequence, very enjoyable. The way that they kind of show off his powers and what he can do, very well handled, very much liked it. Now, another thing to consider in this is that these Netflix series, each one of them seems to be getting a little bit racier and racier. So this one continues that. Jessica Jones had a good bit more sexual content than Daredevil did, and it seemed like the second season of Daredevil was even more violent than the first season of Daredevil, and this seems to be a continuation of this. This one pushes the sexual content even further than Jessica Jones with it, and it doesn't necessarily, because it's only first episode, push the graphic violence as far as Daredevil went throughout its 2 seasons. But even in this first episode, they're not pulling any punches. Literally, punches aren't pulled. A guy punches a guy and blood's spraying up in the air. Guy gets punched, bone sticks out. I mean, that level of graphic violence. So if you were uncomfortable with the more graphic, violent elements of Daredevil, that's in here too. If you are uncomfortable with the sexual content of Jessica Jones, that's in here too, probably more so. So just to give you a heads up. Finally, there is one thing in this episode that ties it to the MCU. It's just kind of a cute little Easter egg that felt like something that would actually happen in New York City. So overall, I don't want to give this episode a rating. I'll do that once I finish reviewing the whole thing, and I'll do that in a day or two. But overall, I would say, yeah, absolutely give this show a chance. It's very enjoyable, very different from Daredevil, while feeling very much in the same vein as Daredevil and Jessica Jones. I very much enjoyed it. I'm going to watch another episode, even though it's 3:30 in the morning. Very excited to see where this show goes and to see a different spin on the Marvel Universe. With that said, what did you think about the first episode of Luke Cage? Please tell me in the comment section, because I don't want to just talk about TV. I want to talk about TV with you. I'd love to have a great discussion about the goods, the bads, the interesting about it. Please comment there. You can see in some of these videos below me that I've talked about several other TV shows. Like to talk about those with you as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like the sound of my voice, please consider clicking that subscribe button. If you do, whenever I do my full season review in a day or two, it'll show up right there in your feed. Love it if you would watch that as well. Thank you so much for watching.